Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we speak with Dr. Shannon Behan, who is a guest again on our podcast. Dr. Behan is the president of the British Columbia Principal Vice Principal Association, also known as the BCPVPA. She discusses staffing shortages across roles, addressing the pervasive staffing issues in teaching, support staff, and principals, especially in remote areas.
This podcast is brought to you by the inequity of staffing shortages in schools, something which is most acute in rural and remote areas due to limited access to teacher education programs and fewer incentives for teachers to relocate. Principals and vice principals are increasingly taking on roles traditionally assigned to support staff or classroom teachers, leaving less time for school leadership. This shift not only impacts school operations, but also limits the development of future education leaders. Creative solutions are much needed and long overdue.
Check out our website, www.restorative.ca, for ways to use restorative leadership to navigate those staffing challenges you face daily as a school principal. Now, let's join your hosts, Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. Another issue that comes up, I think, in your work around the province, Shannon, is addressing the issue of staffing. Now, staffing at all levels, staffing in terms of teachers, in terms of support staff, but also in terms of principals. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing and seeing around the province?
The general trend is that there is a lack of educated staff in many school districts. It's greater in areas outside of the larger metropolitan area of Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. Here in the province of BC, our ministry is working hard on making some changes to support opportunities for folks maybe in the north who don't have access to post-secondary institutions to still be able to access programs and course offerings. And they're trying to get really creative, and it'll take a few years for sure. But number one, there's a generalized shortage. So I'm on a few working groups, and one is to look at the teacher education programs that are being offered throughout the province. And so one of the great initiatives out of the teacher education programs is to provide support and resources for upcoming teachers to do their practicums in more remote locations. So for example, I think there are 3 teachers in Haida Gwaii. There are doing their practicum, a few in Port Hardy, a few in the north, and these students receive financial remuneration to support going to those areas. My hope is that will also include the support being tagged into them staying and then working there longer term. But there are complications around that because you can't force people to stay. If you have them do their practicum and you're paying them, then are they in the union or are they not? All of those complexities need to be worked out. With our support staff, it's also the same thing. If somebody wants to go into education and say they have a family and they're in a remote location, at the moment, then they would have to move to a greater area. So if they have children that have friends in a smaller community, it takes a lot. It's a big shift to go to the city or somewhere where there's a university so they can access education. And then the other piece of that is in BC, we always rank really well internationally on our PISA results. And so we have to ensure that we maintain the integrity of our program offerings for educators within the system.
So what's the impact of that on principals?
It's really difficult because a lot of our principals, they go into their schools and one of the first things that they do is look up on the computer and say, okay, who's not coming to work today? And then you have a short-term immediate staff meeting with yourself. And if you have a vice principal, that's great. And so you can move people around and try to fill all the possible holes. And what I'm hearing is vice principals and principals are teaching and doing a lot of bus duty before and after school. And one of the schools I was at, the principal said, oh, there's nobody for after school, I'll do bus duty. That's great. And That's who principals are. They just will do what needs to be done to get the job done. And I thought, gee whiz, after school is such an important time to be outside, connect with families, make sure the children are connecting with the right older sister or older brother so that they can find their way home, they get on the right bus, and then you're doing a lot of problem solving. Or, goodness, what if there is a critical incident and your principal is out in the back on bus duty? And so those pieces, that's where, for me, I have like a heightened awareness. If your principal is doing SEA or EA work or teaching grade 4, which is fantastic, like it's so fun being in the class and those jobs are really great, or they're doing their bus duty, what's being dropped? And I'm worried about the critical incident piece. And then again, it becomes your educational leadership component of your job, which is what we love so much. Then again, that kind of goes to periphery to maintain running a school in the best way possible. And it goes back to the stress that's on our leadership teams all throughout.
So the staffing challenge from I'm hearing is, we're talking about remote areas more, but is also, are there less people going into the profession at the front end to start with? Are you seeing, is that what they're saying?
And in BC, we have some data that shows the number of people who go into education and leave within 5 years. That number is growing and growing. So teachers are going in and then they're thinking, I think they're experiencing the stress of on the job. Parents are very communicative and very involved. And so sometimes the way that they communicate, a lot of our incoming teachers think, you know what, I actually don't need this kind of communication. And so they're leaving.
So has there been discussions around that, around why there's less going in and the leaving, and what we're gonna do about that as a ministry or as an education system? Yeah,
that's a great question, because the ministry has seen that data, and one of the committees that I'm on, and we're meeting the next couple of days, is a mentorship program for teachers, which is so important. And what I would like to see in the mentorship program is a cohesive program that has teachers, like a team around our incoming teachers, that includes your principal or district staff, other teachers who can mentor incoming teachers, but have a whole support network around our incoming teachers. Because many of our teachers or students who went to school, they loved school, they were great at school, they went on to post-secondary, they loved it. Then they go into teaching and it's a totally different world. Like being at the kind of front of the classroom or your guide on the side is a totally different experience for many of our students who went through school and just loved it and were engaged. It's a really different dynamic. And so our teachers need a lot of support with really well thought out mentorship programs. And so that's one way that the province is responding to the need that we're seeing here.
And I'll take it to another degree, because we're talking about principals and vice principals, but the learning environment for students and the teaching environment for teachers has a huge effect on the stress level of the administrators. One of the other areas that's been a challenge, certainly in Ontario, and I imagine across the country and even through the States as well, is that there's a lot more challenging students coming into our schools that have a lot of needs. And those needs are very difficult to meet because, once again, we're short staff of those support workers. And so then it becomes incumbent upon someone else to backfill that role. A principal's in acting as a support worker for the day and without the skills of know how to do it, or they just go without for the day. And now the teacher in the classroom is trying to manage with a dysregulated student who would normally have that one-to-one or a certain amount of support. What conversations are taking place in that area to increase or at least meet the needs of the students with the support that they need?
I know that's a really good question. And I think about that one a lot, because I do hear people saying, oh, the kids are different coming into school. And I keep asking myself, are they? Are they really that different? I do recognize we have the COVID hangover of children who didn't have the opportunity to learn about regulation alongside their peers. And then also parents who were maybe learning how to parent at a time where they were also disconnected from others that they could connect with and learn from. But I just keep thinking, are our children really that different, or what is it? So that's one, and for me, I think the jury's out. Part of it is, yeah, we are all things to all people, yes. Is there a different universal design for learning approach that we need to systematize for our classrooms? And I also think if we're just going to rely on more EA support, that's not the answer. I don't know what the answer is, but that is not the answer, because you will never have enough EA support for what we think we need. Maybe it's training our teachers in a different way. Maybe it's how we use space. Maybe there's so many more maybes in that one. And then the other piece is children often don't get diagnosed until they're in grade 3, often at the earliest. So we see the kids coming in, or if we have a preschool attached to the school, we see the children coming in and they're identifiers that indicate they might need more support than less, but they don't have a diagnosis until they're in grade 3. And like I said, that's at the earliest. So we ask ourselves then, from kindergarten to grade 1, grade 2, and then grade 3, what has happened for our children? Have they been able to make those markers of reading markers? Have they been able to connect socially with other friends? Are we setting them up really well for the rest of their education career by how we've created the systems in our early primary? And for me, the biggest bang for your buck is putting as much structure and support as you can in your primary classes. And I know in one of my other schools, I did get a lot of feedback because I did put, I think, EAs in every single classroom in primary. I didn't have enough or as much in the upper intermediate. And so it didn't seem fair. But that was just a philosophical belief that I had and we had in the district about support our little ones as much as we possibly can to get them over that hump and set them up for success. But I don't know, are the children really that different?
We've had this debate a lot. People ask, what's the hardest thing about being in education? You tell people, oh, I was a principal. They say, what's the hardest thing? And I said, it's never the children. The hardest part of the job is usually dealing with other adults, and all the adults we deal with. The students are students, and we can manage even the toughest schools I was ever in. I like the students, and you can work with the students and you can bring them along, but you do need that support. When I first started out as an administrator, I can't remember having an autistic student in my school, let alone one in every class. And so those numbers are increasing, and they bring with them challenges, but it's when you don't have that support and those students are struggling that we find that then it falls upon the teacher of the classroom who's now reading in the office saying, I need some help. And as you said earlier, now the principal's down in the kindergarten class, or the vice principal's in the kindergarten class or the grade 1 class, managing some of those behavioral concerns. So I think there is an increasing number of students with needs, physical needs, as well as mental health supports and medical needs. It's about meeting those needs. And when we've got the support staff, it works beautifully. I think it does. It flows nicely. And I think most teachers are quite good with it. It's the struggling times when you get that list in the morning and 2 of my EAs away and 3 of my teachers away. And now I'm backfilling with people who don't have a relationship with that child. And even though you've got a body, they don't have that same relationship as the person who's there every day for any other reason.
A lot of what you say really resonates. And one of the pieces is the relationships parents have with school. So I was fortunate in my career to work at a BC offshore school in Beijing. And what I noticed there is that the parents have an excellent relationship with the school and the teachers and the principals. And so, for example, if a child was a bit sleepy in class, I could phone the parents and say, could you please make sure that your son or daughter is in bed by 9 o'clock, make sure you take away their technology, they're sleeping in class, and it's going to impact their performance at school. The next day it turns around. We don't always have that same relationship with parents and adults in our school community. And for me, I've always asked the big question, like, why are we in this current situation? And we know historically in Canada, we have a large population here that has a very complicated relationship with schools. Rightfully, They came by it honestly. And that's the hard and heavy work that we have to do to rebuild the trust and the relationships that we have with our Indigenous families in each of our communities. But building that relationship with parents is so difficult and so important to what happens for kids at school. And then you're right, Steve, you're trying to work on building that relationship with parents after school, but guess what? You can't, because you know what? You have to be on bus duty.
Mhm.
It's tricky. It's very tricky.
It almost sounds, there's no broad stroke solutions,
Oh,
right?
no.
And this is where you get down to having the connection with your superintendent or your supervisor and being able to say, let's look at my situation, right? And how I can reduce that stress or reduce some of the staff challenges based on my situation, be able to have those really vulnerable, open discussions about how am I going to bring my parents on side, or how am I going to support these students that are in my school that may not be in the other school.
And I think principals build connections with their staff by calling in the support that they see that the teacher needs. So you build a huge bunch of trust with a staff member if you've identified that there may be a need for some type of an outside resource. So here's an example. I got called into an elementary school of a grade 5 teacher who was just absolutely overwhelmed with filling out behavior reports. She was writing an average of 12 to 15 behavior reports for students every single day in a class of less than 25. And she was just going nuts. And the principal saw this and said, Stan, could you come in and just take a look? And I was looking around, and the suggestion that I made just coming in was to change the arrangement of the desks, because what was happening is with the kids all in groups, they were getting each other going all the time. And there was no place for the teacher to be in the center or on the side, because half the class wasn't even facing her. So I said, let's just change the arrangement. And I said, do you dare to try something a little different? She said, okay. So we arranged all the desks in a circle facing out. And so everybody, when they were sitting at their desk, were facing, and all they could really see was the wall. And the teacher actually had space to walk all the way around. So now she's facing the student. She can see the rest of the class at a glance. And I want to meet with you, class. She would bring a chair in. The kids would just turn their chairs around. She had an instant circle. I got an email from her a week later. She said, Stan, it is unbelievable. Just changing the furniture and that approach. I haven't had a single behavior report for a whole week, right? It's that kind of thing that as a principal, if you can identify what a concern is, get somebody in to help that individual teacher, you're scoring big points as a principal in terms of addressing the needs in the class. But the principal didn't go into the classroom themselves, right? Brought somebody else in, but they made the call to have me come in.
I love that. That's great.
As Dr. Shannon Behan points out, in all the many things that schools and districts do well, the educational future of many students depends on prioritizing mentorships, teacher retention, principal retention, and addressing staffing shortages. Find out more about our work with restorative leadership that really does address some of the very practical how-tos that you can use in your school building next week through restorative practices at www.restorative.ca. Let's continue to talk about these issues like staffing shortages that have such a tremendous impact on our schools and particularly on our students, and then put that into our practice.